So the Battle of Gettysburg took place the second summer of the American Civil War. At this point, the war had pretty much boiled down to two fronts. In the West, Ulysses S. Grant and the Army of the Tennessee, fighting John Pemberton, and in the East, Joseph Hooker and the Army of the Potomac, fighting Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia. The Western theater was faring far better than the forces in the East. Robert E. Lee had led the Army of Northern Virginia to victory at Gaines' Mill, Second Manassas, Fredericksburg, and the legendary victory at Chancellorsville. It was legendary because he had such a substantially smaller force than the Union Army. The Army of the Potomac had at this point been through three generals: George B. McClellan, Ambrose Burnside, and Joseph Hooker. McClellan had actually restructured the army into the force it had become, and if not for being so cautious and arrogant, McClellan actually fought Lee twice at Malvern Hill and Sharpsburg, causing a draw. Debatably, had he been more aggressive, he may have defeated the rebel forces. Burnside was removed after the disaster at Fredericksburg. Hooker was made the new commander of the army. He took command during the winter quarters of 1862 to 1863. His tactic to take the Confederate capital of Richmond was sound. He would threaten from Fredericksburg, then flank around to Richmond and capture the Confederate government. Lee, however, will outfox the Union forces and defeat them at the Battle of Chancellorsville and push them back across the river. Following this astounding victory, the Confederate government directed Lee to march into the North, destroy, not defeat, destroy the Army of the Potomac, then march on Washington and impose peace upon the federal government and officially recognize the Confederacy as a sovereign nation. So begins the Gettysburg Campaign. Lee invades the North through the Blue Ridge Mountains, planning where to meet and destroy the Army of the Potomac. The Army of Northern Virginia was built using the corps system, a system created by Napoleon Bonaparte. Lee had what was known as Grand Corps, very similar to Napoleon. Before the Gettysburg Campaign, Lee had two Grand Corps. The first corps, commanded by James Longstreet, a South Carolinian, much like Lee, was opposed to the institution of slavery, but decided to side with his home state over the federal government. His second corps was commanded by Thomas Stonewall Jackson, a Virginian who was a teacher at the Virginia Military Institute. Much like his fellow officers, sided with his state rather than federal government. However, in 1863, Jackson died before the beginning of the Gettysburg Campaign due to complications of a wound he received at Chancellorsville. Lee would go on to say he lost his right arm. That spring, Lee reorganized the entire Army of Northern Virginia into three Grand Corps, pulling troops from the Richmond garrisons as well as Longstreet's corps. James Longstreet will command the First Corps, with the divisions of Lafayette McLaws, John Bell Hood, and George Pickett under his command. The new Second Corps will be commanded by Richard S. Ewell, with Jubal Early, Edward Johnson, and Robert Rhodes divisions. The new Third Corps will be led by General A.P. Hill, with Richard Anderson, Henry Heath, and W. Dorsey Pender's division, and Jeb Stuart and his cavalry division leading reconnaissance and strike attacks for the Army of Northern Virginia. Now, earlier I used the term Grand Corps, which means these were large fighting forces, almost like armies on their own right. The Army of the Potomac had actually used corps as well, just not as large. But something else is different with the Army of the Potomac. At this point, they had a new commander. After his defeat at Chancellorsville, plus his policy of letting prostitutes follow the army, these women would later be called hookers, Hooker was removed from command and replaced with General George Gordon Meade as the new and final commander of the Army of the Potomac. Meade, the son of an American agent, he was born in Cadiz, Spain during the Napoleonic Wars. His family would return to the United States and settle in Pennsylvania. He would have actually applied to go to the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, but later, as strangely the second choice, would go to West Point. Meade had also become something of a war profiteer. When his corps' quartermaster would get overfilled, he would sell them on the side. He actually thought he was being arrested when he was given command of the army by Lincoln, because Lincoln had sent the provost general. Provost general was pretty much the Civil War equivalent of a military police officer. He was actually not Lincoln's first choice, though. He, in fact, wanted John Reynolds of the First Corps, but Reynolds refused. Meade would be made commander of the Army of the Potomac the morning of June 28th, 1863. The army he was in command, though, was racing through the roads of Virginia and Maryland, was made up of 7 corps. Those corps and their emblems are as follow. In command of the First Corps was General John F. Reynolds, with the Circle Corps badge. He had under his command James S. Wadsworth, Abner Doubleday, and no, he did not invent baseball, and John C. Robinson's division. Within this corps were the famous units such as the Iron Brigade, primarily units made up of German immigrants, and the 14th Brooklyn in their French chasseur-inspired uniforms, as well as the Bucktails of the 149th Pennsylvania. The Second Corps, commanded by General Winfield Scott Hancock, with the Clover Corps badge. His 1st Division commanded by John C. Caldwell, his 2nd Division by John Gibbons, and his 3rd Division by Alexander Hayes. Within this corps was the famous Irish Brigade, freshly under the command of Colonel Patrick Kelly, the Garibaldi Guard, made up of Italian immigrants. Our next corps is the 3rd Corps, under General Daniel Sickles, with the Diamond Corps badge, with the divisions of David Birney and Andrew Humphreys. Sickles is a rarity in the fact that he was a politician who bought his commission and would later go on to be the first man to be not guilty of murder by reason of temporary insanity, for the murder of Francis Scott Key's son. Yep, the man who wrote the national anthem of the United States. Sickles murdered his son. Moving on. The 5th Corps, commanded by George Sykes with the Maltese Cross Corps symbol, had the divisions of James Barnes, Romain Ayres, and Samuel Crawford. In this corps is the famous 20th Maine under Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. It is also the corps that Meade had formerly been in command of before his promotion. The 6th Corps, under John Sedgwick, and the Cross Corps emblem, he had the divisions of Horatio Wright, John Newton, and Albion Howe. The 6th Corps is special in the fact that it was the least engaged corps, and at the time of the Battle of Gettysburg was the largest of the 7 Union corps present. Next we have the 11th Corps under Oliver Otis Howard with the Crescent Moon Corps badge. Under his command were the divisions of Carl Schurz, Francis Barlow, Adolf von Steinwehr. Howard was somewhat humiliated after Chancellorsville, due to the Jackson's assault crushing his corps in sheer moments and breaking the Union line. And our last corps of infantry is the 12th Corps, under Henry W. Slocum, with the Star Corps badge, General John Geary and Adolphus Williams divisions underneath. Also, the Army of the Potomac had an artillery reserve corps commanded by Robert O. Tyler, but at Gettysburg it will primarily be commanded by Henry Jackson Hunt, General Meade's chief of artillery. Most importantly, though, in reference of Gettysburg, was the Army of the Potomac's Cavalry Corps under General Alfred Pleasonton, with John Buford, H. Judson Kilpatrick, and David McGregg. The idea of a cavalry corps was in fact John Buford's idea, and it's strongly debated that the only reason he was not made the actual commander of the corps is because he was too close to George B. McClellan, and Hooker did not want a McClellan ally in charge. Of course, this is debated, and it was proven Buford was truly a better commander and tactician than Pleasonton. Also, when it comes to the story of Gettysburg, John Buford is without a single doubt the most important player in the battle and the history that will play out. While Lee and his army raced from Virginia to Maryland and then to Pennsylvania, Meade was furiously chasing the rebel forces. Buford will be the only one to locate them and set the field.